Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated is without a doubt one of the best adaptations of its franchise. Its catalogue of characters, humour and plot are all fascinating, but the best aspect of the show and what makes it stand out is the curse. The Curse of Crystal Cove is a mysterious aspect of the show that looms over the characters. The gradual reveal of the curse and the monstrous creature that surrounds it provides for intriguing entertainment. In previous episodes I discussed the curse and the timeline of the treasure, and in this video I will conclude that timeline. I'll be explaining the final confrontation with the entity. Season 2 begins with a summary of the previous season in which Mare Jones is revealed to be the freak of Crystal Cove and the reason that the original Mystery Incorporated vanished all those years ago. Fred discovers that he is the son of Brad and Judy Reeves, so he leaves Crystal Cove and sets out to find them, causing the gang to split up. Most of them are unhappy with Velma for not telling the group about Angel earlier, while Professor Pericles has 2 pieces of the planispheric disc. We then cut to present-day Crystal Cove where a clown named Crybaby Clown is harassing the residents. This clown is not only wreaking havoc through the town, but kidnapping its residents. In addition to the clown, Crystal Cove has a new mayor, Mayor Nettles, a middle-aged redhead woman who is far more capable than Fred Jones Sr. ever was. Mayor Nettles is concerned about the clown's ongoing antics as well as the state of the town and her inability to resolve the matter. Fortunately, a solution is provided when she is approached by a mysterious individual who informs her that if she wants to get rid of the clown, she must find the members of Mystery Incorporated and bring them back together. The stranger hands her a file containing Daphne, Shaggy, Scooby, and Fred's whereabouts. Mayor Nettles makes it her mission to reunite the team. She locates Scooby on a farm and removes Shaggy from the military school he was enrolled in. She also finds Fred, who has become a hobo while searching for his parents. Mayor Nettles brings all the members of Mystery Incorporated into Crystal Cove, excluding the girls who never left the town. The gang reunites after being brought back together by Mayor Nettles, and the mysterious individual who gave her the tip turns out to be Velma. However, not all members of the old gang return. Daphne refuses to join, having given up solving mysteries in favor of spending time with her new boyfriend. Now that the gang are back together partially, they regroup inside the mystery machine and discuss what they've missed while they were away. The boys question Velma regarding the location of Mr. E, Professor Pericles, and Angel Dynamite. Velma admits that she hasn't heard anything from either of them since Mare Jones was arrested, except for one occasion where Angel did try to visit her, but Velma turned her away. Scooby then informs the gang the last time he saw Pericles was the night the freak was discovered, and that now the parrot has 2 pieces of the disc and is looking for the other 4. When the gang learns of this, they vow to prevent Pericles from locating the remaining pieces, but first they must stop the clown. Mystery Inc. is forced to investigate the clown mystery without Daphne, which proves to be catastrophic because they are unable to stop the crybaby clown. The clown escapes, and for the first time, Mystery Incorporated is unable to solve a mystery. Episode 2, The House of the Nightmare Witch, begins in Russia with 2 spies in highly mechanized stealth suits breaking into a museum. As the spies enter the premises, they are revealed to be Hot Dog Water and Velma. The 2 begin their search for a specific display, Baba Yaga's exhibit, that contains something that they require. They locate the exhibit at the center of the museum and are ready to approach it, but stop when they hear footsteps and keys jingling in the distance. A guard enters the room and the 2 girls hide. The guard foils their plot to break into the exhibit, forcing the girls to call their boss, who is orchestrating the entire thing. Their employer turns out to be Mr. E, who decides to buy the exhibit instead of stealing it and ship it to Crystal Cove. The girls are told to leave and return to Crystal Cove, but as they go, the Baba Yaga exhibit seemingly comes to life and the statue attacks the security guard. Later in the episode, when Mystery Incorporated finally returns to school after being away for so long, they run into Daphne and see her and her new boyfriend in the hallway. She once again reaffirms that she is no longer interested in solving mysteries. As a replacement for Daphne, Velma suggests adding Hot Dog Water into the group, who at the start of the episode was seen attempting to break into the Baba Yaga exhibit with Velma, unbeknownst to the rest of the group. Hot Dog Water is accepted into Mystery Incorporated, although Fred isn't as happy as the others because he still misses Daphne. Elsewhere, the Baba Yaga exhibit is transported to Crystal Cove by curator Vronsky and his assistant. The curator examines the house, but as he does, it comes to life once more. The curator is attacked by Baba Yaga, who then kidnaps his assistant and takes off with her in her house. Later, the police phone the gang saying they saw Baba Yaga's house come to life and disappear in the direction of the woods. The crew immediately start to investigate the disappearance of Baba Yaga's house. Velma and Hot Dog Water use this mystery as a cover-up to continue working for Mr. E. The 2 girls separate from the group and receive a phone call from him. He warns them not to mess up, which they ensure they won't. The girls are oblivious to the fact that Scooby has been following them and has heard the entire call. Without the group, Velma and Hot Dog Water locate Baba Yaga's house. When they get inside, they discover the third piece of the planispheric disc, which is what Mr. E had been hunting for the entire time. The girls want to tell Mr. E over the phone, but Scooby, Fred and Shaggy stop the call and catch them red-handed. The boys explain that Scooby had already informed them of the phone call, and they immediately question Velma, forcing her to admit that she and Hot Dog Water are secretly working for Mr. E. Velma reveals that she wasn't given much of an option but to work with Mr. E after the gang split up, and she only did it to prevent Pericles from obtaining additional pieces of the disc. Velma swears that she would have never actually given the pieces to Mr. E. The boys decide to trust Velma after hearing her side of the story, and the group decides to keep the piece. By the end of the episode, the group has found the third piece of the disc and solved the mystery surrounding Baba Yaga's house. The group splits up and returns to their homes. When Hot Dog Water gets to her own home, she discovers Mr. E hiding in the shadows waiting for her. He tells Hot Dog Water that Velma can no longer be trusted, claiming that she is more devoted to Mystery Inc. than finding the pieces. Hot Dog Water begs Mr. E to give Velma another chance, but he warns her not to get her personal feelings involved and to focus on finding the pieces. Episode 3, The Night the Clown Cried Part 2, Tears of Doom, sees the return of the Crybaby Clown after Mystery Incorporated had failed to get rid of him in Episode 1. The clown continues to wreak havoc on the town and kidnaps more people. This episode also sees the return of Angel Dynamite, who now goes as Cassidy Williams, having embraced her true identity. Cassidy is getting a haircut when she is approached by Mr. E, who informs her that Fred's parents are returning for him after all these years. This surprises Cassidy and causes her to become suspicious. Mr. E implies that due to Mayor Jones's imprisonment and the freak of Crystal Cove no longer being an issue, that Fred's parents can return safely, but Cassidy isn't convinced by the idea. Mr. E suggests that if she is worried, perhaps it is time for her to get close to the teenagers again and spy on them. Cassidy refuses as she still feels guilty for lying to them. She states that the teenagers are good kids who remind her of herself and her friends when they were younger. But Mr. E stresses that it is very important that she gets close to the kids for the sake of not only finding the pieces, but for the sake of all those who reside in Crystal Cove, once again alluding to a great danger that surrounds the town and the treasure. We cut back to the mystery gang who have brought Daphne back to their team and rid the town of the clown nuisance. After Episode 3, Episode 4, Web of the Dreamweaver sees Daphne finally return to the team after 2 episodes. Daphne is welcomed back with open arms. Unfortunately, her return means that Hot Dog Water is no longer needed. Hot Dog Water is kicked out by the team, who barely cares for her absence, aside for Velma, who was quite fond of Marcy. Hot Dog Water leaves the team, feeling bitter and slated. She makes a phone call to Mr. E and tells her that he was right about Velma. The episode resumes and moves on to Mystery Incorporated investigating a new mystery in Crystal Cove. A string of people have been haunted in their dreams by a supposed Dreamweaver. Unsurprisingly, the gang solves the mystery, and they count it as their first official mystery as a team since Daphne's return. At the end of the episode, the gang goes to Fred's house, but they are startled to see his front door open. When they enter the house, they note that it's spotless, as if it's been cleaned by someone. This is strange since Fred has been living alone since Mayor Jones was imprisoned. Suddenly, 2 middle-aged adults step from the shadows, a blonde woman and a man with grey hair who seem to be a couple. They introduce themselves as Brad Charles and Judy Reeves, Fred's biological parents.
Boy, ain't no fucking way, boy. Boy, ain't no way, boy.
In Episode 5, The Hodag of Horror, a travelling show called The Travelling Cabinet of Curiosity makes a stop in Crystal Cove to showcase its weird and wacky supernatural items. Gene Shepard, the owner of the attractions, calls the townspeople over and invites them to examine his many exhibits. However, as the townsfolk come closer, one of his attractions, the Hodag, comes alive and attacks them. The episode then shifts to Fred at home with his parents and his friends. Fred's parents explain that because of the freak they were unable to ever visit him, but now that the threat is gone, they can be in his life again, and with them they have bought a dog called Nova, who Scooby takes a liking to. Fred is barely able to process his emotions, so he decides to concentrate on solving the Hodag mystery instead. Fred's parents offer their assistance because they have experience with traps, and like Fred, enjoys everything to do with complex contraptions, but Fred insists that he doesn't need their help. Mystery Incorporated choose to look into the Hodag at the scene of the crime. The gang pays a visit to the owner of the Travelling Cabinet of Curiosities and look through his exhibits. They uncover a locked chest while looking at various items. When they ask Gene what's in the chest, he becomes very defensive and says it's something incredibly valuable, so priceless that he only opens the box once a year. Nearing the end of the episode, the Hodag is revealed to be two people, a cheese sommelier and one of Gene Shepard's employees. It is also revealed that the chest Gene was guarding held an aged cheese roll. However, what was inside the cheese was far more valuable than the cheese itself. The fourth piece of the planispheric disc was hidden inside the aged roll of cheese. The gang is baffled as to how the piece managed to get there, but they are grateful to have found it because it brings them one step closer to stopping Pericles. Elsewhere, unbeknownst to the teenagers, the old Mystery Incorporated reunite in the woods, having been summoned by Pericles, who informs them that the new Mystery Incorporated has obtained the third and fourth piece of the disc. He proposes that they team up once more in order to find the treasure. Episode 6, The Art of Darkness, continues after Pericles' proposition in Episode 5. A day after meeting in the woods, Cassidy pays a visit to Fred's parents, telling them to forget about the treasure and to focus solely on their son. Brad and Judy respond by threatening Cassidy to stay away from them, clearly considering Pericles' request and dropping their mask of friendliness. Cassidy realizes that her instincts were correct and that Brad and Judy are not only untrustworthy but also are uninterested in Fred's well-being. Cassidy leaves the Joneses' home and returns to her radio station, but instead of playing music, she starts spilling the beans about Crystal Cove and what's been going on beneath the surface. In Episode 7, The Gathering Gloom, Mr. E tries to seek Velma's assistance once more, but this time Velma turns him down and refuses to work with him again. Pericles then contacts Mr. E and requests to join forces once more. Pericles informs Mr. E that he needs his help because the other members of the old Mystery Incorporated no longer trust him. Mr. E refuses to join Pericles because he is worried about being betrayed again. Pericles, on the other hand, tries to persuade his former friend by referring to Mr. E as Ricky and reminiscing about a time when they were close. Pericles leaves Mr. E to think about it, and at the end of the episode, Mr. E does decide to join forces with the parrot. Mr. E invites Pericles to Destroyer to celebrate their alliance, but they realize if they are to continue with their plans, there must be nothing in their way, including Cassidy Williams, who has been revealing their secrets on her radio show. Pericles concludes that Cassidy must be silenced permanently. Episode 8, Night on the Haunted Mountain, sees Mystery Incorporated investigate a fury that has been terrorizing a mountain in a desert near a town just on the edge of Crystal Cove. The gang visit the desert and discover an unusual ship on the mountainside. They enter the old ship and take a look around. While exploring it, the teenagers discover a ship manifest that belonged to a crew of Spanish conquistadors. Velma reads the manifest. The ship manifest is written from the perspective of Fernando Aguirre, the captain of the Santa Luisa of the 17th century. According to the manifest, Fernando Aguirre had learned about a magnificent treasure, a sarcophagus made of pure crystal in a distant region. Captain Aguirre sailed for months with his crew in search of such a fortune until he arrived on the coast of Yucatan, where the sarcophagus was rumored to be held. He and his team explored the jungle until they discovered the crystal sarcophagus in a Mayan temple. Captain Aguirre took the sarcophagus aboard his ship, but came to realize that something was amiss with the treasure. There was an entity inside the sarcophagus, an entity of great evil. After only a brief encounter with the creature, Captain Aguirre and his crew felt compelled to commit crimes, destroy, steal, and murder. Captain Aguirre was able to regain his sanity after realizing what he and his crew had become, and in an act of desperation to get rid of the entity, Captain Aguirre ordered his crew to take the ship elsewhere until they came across an uncharted cove that would later become Crystal Cove. Captain Aguirre ordered his men to take the sarcophagus deep beneath Crystal Cove. He then divided the planispheric disc into 6 pieces, which at the time was the map he had used to find the treasure. He gave 5 of the pieces to 5 of his men and took one for himself to ensure that no one would be able to find the treasure or free the entity. Aguirre and his men went their separate ways. He took his piece and concealed it in a compartment of his ship, and as an extra act of precaution, he planted his ship atop a mountain. After reading the manifest, the gang is surprised to learn that these conquistadors were the ones who went missing after discovering Crystal Cove, and that somewhere in this ship lies the 5th piece of the planispheric disc. The group begins to frantically search for the 5th piece of the disc. After a careful search, they find the piece. However, the Fury interrupts them and swoops down at them, taking the piece for herself. Velma, refusing to give up the piece, pursues the Fury and leaves the group aboard the ship. Velma finally catches up to the Fury and discovers that it's Hot Dog Water who is still working for Mr. E.
Boy, ain't no fucking way, boy.
Velma wonders if Hot Dog Water will give the piece to him, but Hot Dog Water ultimately decides to give it back to Velma because she has always been her friend. However, after handing the piece to Velma, Hot Dog Water states that she must flee because she is afraid of what Mr. E will do to her if he discovers she gave away the piece. Hot Dog Water vanishes, leaving the gang with 3 pieces of the disc while Pericles only has 2. In episode 10, Night Terrors, Mr. Incorporated decide to visit a ski resort, but their plans are cut short by an avalanche which closes the road and damages the mystery machine. Fred drives the van uphill for a location to work after noticing that it requires repair, but instead finds the Burlington Library, which welcomes weary travelers. The gang seek refuge with the host Dan Flunk, who runs the library, and the cook Don Fong, an eccentric man with a bizarre method of speaking. Dan Flunk gives the gang a tour of the library while highlighting its history. He says that Oswald P. Burlington founded the library in the 1880s with the assistance of his mystery-solving crew, which is eerily similar to Mystery Incorporated. As Dan Flunk continues the tour, Scooby and Shaggy sneak away from the group to find the kitchen. They find the kitchen and begin to eat, but their meal is cut short when they are attacked by the cook Don Fong, who transforms into a hideous red monster. Scooby and Shaggy narrowly escape the red demon and return to the others, warning them about the monster lurking in the kitchen. Dan Flunk and the rest of the gang investigate the so-called kitchen demon, but there is no sign of a creature or any struggle. Scooby and Shaggy's claims of the red demon are dismissed as exhaustion-induced hallucinations. However, Shaggy and Scooby aren't the only ones to experience these delusions. The rest of the group experience strange encounters in which they are either attacked by monsters or see things that aren't there. Velma spends her night in the library ignoring the weird things that have occurred. She reads up on the history of the Benevolent Lodge of Mystery, which consisted of Scotty O'Rourke, Oswald P. Burlington, Marianne Blanchard, Abigail Gluck, and Mr. Peaches, their pet orangutan. She becomes more intrigued as she notices that the group vanished mysteriously and without explanation many years ago, similar to the Darrow family and the original Mystery Incorporated. Velma continues to read, fascinated by the weird coincidences, but she comes to a stop when she hears hushed muttering in the library. Velma follows the sound, which takes her to Dean Fenk, the Dean of Darrow University, who was seen in Season 1. Velma looks on from a distance while Dean Fenk talks on her phone about business problems concerning the Burlington Library. Velma is perplexed by the phone call and wonders why Dean Fenk is at the library, but she says nothing and returns to her table to resume reading. While reading, Velma inhales a strange red fume from the firewood and is suddenly overcome by a hallucination in which Oswald P. Burlington and the Benevolent Lodge of Mystery appear before her on a ghost train and then vanish. However, the line between hallucination and reality is fairly thin and uncertain. Velma rushes out of the library to find her friends. She tells them about the hallucination she had in the library and they tell her about their own hallucinations. After much uncertainty and deliberation, they realize that the strange things that have been happening were caused by inhaling the Terrorwood fumes in the library, and the monsters were actually hallucinations induced by someone who works there. They arrange a trap and uncover that Dan Flunk is the perpetrator of the hallucinatory attacks. Dan staged the hallucinations in hopes that the library would be considered hazardous and shut down. Despite his efforts, the library does not close, and by the end of the episode, Dean Fenk informs the gang that she is going to preserve the library under the protection of the Darrow University, which explains the mysterious phone call she received earlier in the library. Fred also fixes the van and the gang decide to go home. However, as they step outside the library, an overhead glass smashes and a book flies out of the library window and drops directly in front of the teenagers. The group picks up the book, which turns out to be an ancient alchemy tome by Barteo Magnus. Velma gasps after hearing this name and explains that Barteo Magnus invented the planispheric disc, and that this book is essentially a manual on how to read the planispheric disc. The gang is confused as to how the book appeared in front of them, a book that happens to be exactly what they need to read the planispheric disc. In the end, Cassidy is revealed to be the one who threw the book out of the window, as she has been leaving clues for the gang. Clues that will solve the mystery and the strange disappearances of all those who came before them. Episode 11, The Midnight Zone, begins with Cassidy on the airways once again exposing the horrors of what lie underneath Crystal Cove. However, during her transmission, a hole is blown in the studio wall and a highly mechanized robot begins to attack the K-Ghoul. Cassidy destroys the robot, but the K-Ghoul blows up in the process. Following the first robot, other waves of robots begin to attack Cassidy, their main goal being to kill her. Cassidy realizes that unless she discovers where the robots are coming from, they will continue to attack her, so she seeks the help of Mystery Incorporated in order to determine where the robots are coming from and who sent them. The group is hesitant to assist her, but they do in order to ensure her safety, even if they are suspicious of her intentions. After some brief investigation, the gang figures out where the robots are coming from and narrows it down to a deep coastal marine trench just off the shores of Crystal Cove. To get to the trench, Daphne enlists the help of Tom and Tub, two children she babysits who are the children of a marine biologist couple who owns a submarine. The gang, along with Cassidy, Tom and Tub, take the submarine underwater and travel to the trench called the Midnight Zone, where they believe the robots are coming from. As the submarine approaches the Midnight Zone, they are greeted by the spirit of an old woman who warns them not to go any further, but the gang continues, ignoring the spirit's warnings, and take the submarine further into the Midnight Zone. Their exploration of the Midnight Zone brings them to an underwater settlement, and the gang question if this is the same settlement created by the missionaries who founded Crystal Cove but vanished. The gang discovers a bunker which they believe is the source of the robots. They enter the bunker and discover a factory inside that has been producing the robots which were responsible for attacking Cassidy. The gang avoids the robots and sneaks around the bunker to find the control room. In the control room, they find a person seated in a chair. When they approach the chair and turn it around, however, the figure in the chair turns out to be a decomposed body that hauntingly whispers the word Nibiru. The group jumps back in fear at the sight of a talking corpse, and in the moment of their confusion, Professor Pericles appears behind them with a group of robots. Pericles confesses that he is the one who sent the robots to get rid of Cassidy after she divulged too much information about what he and Mr. E were doing. Pericles explains that the bunker alongside the robots called Christopherbots were designed by Abigail Gluck, the corpse in the chair who had just spoken. Prior to her death, Abigail was a member of the Benevolent Lodge of Mystery, and she and her friends had been in search of the pieces of the planispheric disk, but the group mysteriously vanished, all except Abigail, who decided to continue her search in Bavaria, Germany, where she also met Professor Pericles. Abigail and Pericles spent many years searching for the piece in the underwater trench, but Abigail would not live to see it. Pericles goes on to explain that the apparition the gang saw earlier was merely a projection of Abigail that he uses to manipulate the Christopherbots so they can aid in his search for the sixth and last piece of the planispheric disk, which he now possesses. After finding the last piece of the disk, Pericles realizes that the bunker is no longer useful and rigs it to self-destruction before departing with his Christopherbots. This causes the gang to run through the bunker, attempting to beat the timer. They reach their submarine, but the bunker's escape door is a manual one, and the submarine can only move if someone stays behind to operate a lever that opens the door. Cassidy volunteers to stay behind and open the door. The gang objects, but Cassidy insists and leads them into the submarine, stating that she'll be right behind them. While the submarine exits the bunker and speeds away to safety, the gang in the submarine witnesses the bunker explode from a safe distance, but Cassidy does not make it out. Following the death of Cassidy Williams in episode 11, episode 12 titled Scare Bear sees Fred's parents, Mr. E and Professor Pericles join forces. They talk about the fact that they, alongside with the new Mystery Incorporated, have 3 pieces of the planispheric disk. Pericles devises a plan in which he directs Brad and Judy to locate where their son has hidden his pieces. Brad and Judy start sleuthing around all the members of Mystery Inc.'s houses, but they are unable to find anything. In episode 13, Wrath of the Krampus, the gang goes over the mystery they've entangled themselves in and realize they are in too deep. Velma tells the group about some research she's been doing after hearing Abigail's decomposed body whisper Nibiru. Velma discovered that Nibiru was a planet explored by Zachariah Sachin based on Babylonian scripture. According to Zachariah Sachin's reading of the Babylonian literature, a gigantic planet called Nibiru passes by the Earth every 3,600 years and permits its sentient occupants to contact human beings. These beings, which Zachariah linked with the Anunnaki of Sumerian myth, were thought to be humanity's first gods. The crew wonders what Nibiru has to do with the cursed treasure, but they pause their investigation to deal with Krampus, a monster based on real German folklore who is petrifying naughty children in Crystal Cove. While the gang deals with Krampus, Brad and Judy continue their search for the disc pieces that Fred has hidden. They monitor the gang with a small robot that allows Mr. E and Professor Pericles to watch their every move. The gang rushes to find Krampus before he petrifies another child. In order to catch him, the gang visits the Crystal Cove jail, which houses the naughtiest child in the town, Marianne Glidden, who was imprisoned after orchestrating a riot in Crystal Cove. The gang believes Krampus will attack the jail and specifically target Marianne, so they set up an elaborate trap and wait for him to arrive. While setting up the trap, the gang encounters Mayor Jones, who was last seen in episode 26 of season 1, where he was revealed to be the freak of Crystal Cove. Soon after, Krampus attacks the jail just as Mystery Incorporated had anticipated, but their efforts to entrap him fail and he petrifies Marianne. Krampus then flees the scene, but the gang give chase and follows him to an abandoned doll factory. They corner Krampus and unmask him, but it turns out that the usual villain behind the mask is not a human, but a robot, one that appears to be controlled by somebody else. Elsewhere, Brad and Judy, who have been busy searching for the disc pieces, figure out where the children have hidden them. Their search leads them to the mystery machine, where they find a silver briefcase that is secured in the trunk. Brad and Judy steal the briefcase, believing it is where the disc pieces have been hidden, and bring it back to Pericles and Mr. E, who are pleased to finally have all the pieces of the disc. The old Mystery Incorporated open the briefcase, expecting to see 3 pieces of the disc. However, instead of disc pieces, the briefcase holds a CD. Pericles and the rest of his team are stunned, and their shock grows as they watch the CD and are greeted by the faces of the new Mystery Incorporated, who explain that they knew that Brad and Judy were attempting to steal their disc pieces, so they left the briefcase in the mystery machine and waited for the couple to take the bait. With the assistance of Marianne and Mayor Jones, the teenagers devised an elaborate scheme in which the Krampus threat was really just a decoy. The gang goes on to explain that while Pericles was trying to steal their pieces, Hot Dog Water had already infiltrated Destroido, where Mr. E was keeping his pieces, and stolen them. Fred ends the message by informing his parents that he knew they weren't sincere, and Scooby joins in by announcing that they will be taking Nova away from Fred's parents and that she'll be staying with them now.
Real mom, real dad, don't expect me home for dinner.
With the new Mystery Incorporated in possession of all 6 pieces, they finally put the planispheric disc together and it begins to shine. As the gang look at it, beneath the town the entity feels the disc pieces assemble and begins to awaken. In the following episode, episode 15, Theater of Doom, the residents of Crystal Cove attempt to stage a play about the Spanish missionaries who first established a settlement in Crystal Cove, but they are stopped by a spirit who claims to be Friar Gabriel, one of the missionaries who founded the town. The spirit tells them not to tell the story because it is forbidden. As always, Mystery Incorporated is called to deal with whatever creep is gallivanting behind a mask. The gang arrives at the location of where the play is being held and proceed to investigate this so-called spirit. Their investigation of this spirit is led with great interest because they are all familiar with the legend of Gabriel Serra. According to Crystal Cove's history, an earthquake 500 years ago caused a piece of the town to plunge into the sea. The people of the town would have perished but didn't because Friar Gabriel and his donkey Porto evacuated everyone. Nearing the end of the episode, the spirit is revealed to be a fake after some deep investigation, but as the gang tries to leave, they are confronted by the real spirit of Gabriel Serra, who tells them that the story of Crystal Cove is a lie, and that Porto the donkey never helped save the town but instead was the one who tried to destroy it. Gabriel Serra explains that he was in a group of 4 friars alongside their donkey Porto. They're a mystery-solving group called the Fraternus Mysterium. One day they encountered a conquistador who had told them a tale of great evil he had come across in his travels. However, the conquistador didn't specify what the evil was, nor did he finish the story. His madness got the better of him and he disappeared into the night and left behind 2 pieces of an artifact, 2 pieces of the planispheric disc. The friars took the artifact, but after taking them they quickly became obsessed with the 2 pieces of the disc. The friars soon realized that something was amiss, there was a greater evil at work. They tried to destroy it, but the evil wouldn't allow them. The evil then manipulated Porto and warped his mind. Porto was influenced greatly by whatever evil surrounded the 2 disc pieces and felt that he had to destroy the town with barrels of gunpowder. They tried to stop Porto, but he had already ignited the gunpowder, stole the 2 pieces and ran away with them. The friars chased Porto, following him into an alligator-infested swamp outside of Crystal Cove. Before the friars could catch up with Porto, the donkey was dragged away by alligators. Luckily, Gabriel was able to retrieve one of the pieces that Porto stole. The other piece was lost at the bottom of the ocean along with half of Crystal Cove after Porto blew it up. Deciding that no one should get their hands on the piece, Gabriel hid his piece in a vat of cheese, hoping that no one would ever find it. After explaining the truth of what really happened, Gabriel Serra warns Mystery Incorporated that Nibiru is coming and that all of this has happened before. He then points at Scooby Doo and utters a final warning that the animal mascot is the catalyst of every horrible event. He crumbles into dust and whispers, "The dog dies." In episode 16, Aliens Among Us, Mystery Incorporated think about Gabriel Serra's warning, especially his eerie final words in regards to Scooby Doo. They perceive it as a bad omen. Shaggy, on the other hand, assures Scooby Doo that he will be fine and that no harm will come to him. To distract Scooby Doo from his worries, Velma presents the group with a contraption she's built, one that will allow her to decipher the planispheric disc and its coordinates. The contraption is able to translate letters on the disc and gives them letters that spells out Signor P. Yahweh, along with random numbers which they assume are coordinates. The gang follows the coordinates to a graveyard and find a grave with the coordinates engraved on it. They dig up the grave assuming there is a key buried inside the coffin. However, there is no key when they open the casket. But they do discover a 16th century Flintstone gun. The group takes the gun and leaves the graveyard, one step closer to finding the treasure. In the next episode, The Horrible Herd, a gang of genetically modified cows attack a farm and the mystery gang is called to deal with it. The group discovers that the cows were created by Professor Pericles with the assistance of Destroido in order to ruin Crystal Cove by leveling the town so that Mystery Incorporated has nowhere to hide their disc pieces. The group does manage to stop the cows without having to give up their pieces, however Nova is injured in the process and is hospitalized. Straight after episode 17, episode 18, Dance of the Undead sees Crystal Cove being overtaken by a dancing plague induced by a ghost band. Nearly all of the citizens of Crystal Cove are brainwashed except for Shaggy and Scooby Doo. Shaggy and Scooby Doo are left to deal with the ghost band. They realize that they need additional help if they are to bring their friends and the citizens of Crystal Cove out of the musical trance. Scooby and Shaggy enlist the help of the Hex Girls, who are punk rock stars. The girls, Scooby and Shaggy, fight the ghost band in a battle of music and snap everyone out of their trance. After helping the Mystery Gang get rid of the musical ghost, the Hex Girls and Mystery Incorporated meet at Shaggy's home. Velma is examining the planispheric disc when the Hex Girls point out the musical notes engraved on the disc. They also note that when sung aloud, these notes make a score. The Hex Girls hum the notes of the score, causing the disc pieces to spin around and move. Velma holds a lamp up to the disc and the disc reveals another set of coordinates. The gang decides to follow the coordinates, but Scooby doesn't accompany them. Instead, he visits Nova, who is still in the hospital and in a deep coma. The remainder of the gang uses the GPS in the mystery machine and find the location of the coordinates. The coordinates leads Fred, Daphne, Velma, and Shaggy to the clam cabin by the Crystal Cove beach. There they find Skipper Shelton wearing a strange hat, one that bears resemblance to a conquistador's helmet. The teenagers ask Skipper Shelton to look at the helmet, and sure enough, on the side of the helmet is the engraved words S. Yahweh. Skipper Shelton assumes that S is for Susan and that Velma is Susan and hands the helmet over to her. But Velma smartly deduces that S stands for Segundo, which translates to second, thus making the Conquistador's helmet the second key. Now in possession of the second key, the gang wonders if there are more keys and wonder why the coordinates on the disc have been leading them to these random objects instead of the treasure itself. But Velma is convinced that it's all connected. Meanwhile, a miserable Scooby-Doo talks to the unconscious Nova, who is still in the hospital. Scooby expresses his concern about the mystery they've entangled themselves in, and further worries about the warning Gabrielle Sarah gave him. In the middle of his rant, Nova unexpectedly awakens from her coma and sits up. Her face is blank and she creepily whispers Nibiru is coming before closing her eyes and falling back into her coma again. In episode 19, The Devouring, the tension between Professor Pericles and Mr. E begins to rise. After the herding incident, Mr. E no longer trusts Pericles, fearing that he has gone too far and is becoming overzealous with his power. In addition to his growing mistrust of the parrot, he begins to deeply regret killing Cassidy Williams, who he still loves. While Mr. E ponders if joining forces with Pericles was a good idea, the new Mystery Incorporated deliberates on all the weird things that have been happening around them, along with their progress in finding the treasure. Scooby also informs the rest of the group about how Nova awoke from her coma and uttered the words Nibiru, which is the same thing Abigail's corpse said, and which happens to be the secret planet inhabited by sentient creatures. The gang is frightened by Nibiru's presence and how intimately related the planet is to this mystery. Velma even admits that despite her strong faith in science, she's beginning to consider if something truly supernatural is taking place in Crystal Cove. She has even borrowed a book from her mother called The Supernatural Curses and Extra-Dimensional Forces Behind Them by Professor Horatio Coran. Elsewhere at Destroido, Pericles has been locked out of the computer system by Mr. E, who believes the parrot is not to be trusted. He tells Pericles that he is in control. Pericles scoffs at the notion, telling Mr. E that he is not in control and has never been, that he is only a shoulder for Pericles to perch on. As Mr. E's distrust for Pericles grows, a gigantic red demon called the Gluten Demon arrives in Crystal Cove and begins to gorge on the town's food supply. The gang takes a break from their research in order to stop the demon from devouring all the food in Crystal Cove. The episode then cuts back to Destroido, where Mr. E holds a private discussion with Brad and Judy. He expresses his concern that Pericles has gone insane. He advises that they look for the pieces without Pericles. Judy and Brad both agree. Nearing the end of the episode, the gluten demon is revealed to be Franceline Jackson, who has made multiple appearances in previous episodes. Franceline Jackson is apprehended by the police, but as she's taken away, she drops a bowl with the word Tereko Yave engraved on its side in front of the mystery gang. The gang takes the bowl and realizes that Tereko Yave translates to the third key. They realize that obtaining this key was no accident and that something supernatural is truly at work. For the final time, the episode cuts to Mr. E and Pericles. Mr. E informs Pericles that he is no longer welcome in the group because all the members have chosen to kick him out. Mr. E insists that the parrot leaves, expecting that Brad and Judy will support him. However, Pericles had already known about Mr. E's plan to kick him out and had teamed up with Brad and Judy without Mr. E's knowledge. Brad and Judy betray Mr. E, and Pericles reveals that he has implanted poisonous cobra larvae in Mr. E's spine that can release at any moment via remote control if Mr. E goes against him. Mr. E is shocked and appalled by Pericles' betrayal, but has no choice but to obey the parrot. Pericles then takes the role of leader of the group and announces that they are to steal the planispheric disc from the new Mystery Incorporated. The next episode, Stand and Deliver, begins at the Rogers home. Scooby is feeding Nova strawberries and cream when Professor Pericles' robots burst in the room and shoot up the place. However, this turns out to be a nightmare, and when Scooby awakens, he is not in Shaggy's house but rather in Nova's room at the hospital. Scooby decides to leave the hospital momentarily to see his friends, relieved that the robots were merely a part of his imagination. When he finds them, he and the gang are quickly summoned to deal with the dandy highwayman, an attractive thief who is charming the women of Crystal Cove and taking them back to his hideout. The party sets out to find the dandy highwayman, but their search leads them nowhere, so they decide to take their investigation to the library and learn about the past highwaymen in Crystal Cove. While the gang reads every book they can get their hands on, Scooby-Doo falls asleep and wakes up in a room with red curtains. He glances around the room and discovers Nova and a strange man who appears to be familiar. The man welcomes Scooby-Doo to the sitting room with a little dance. Scooby is startled and immediately awakens. When he awakens, he knocks over a couple of books. One of the books he knocks over opens and a sailcloth falls from it. Quarto Larvae, the fourth key, is embroidered on the sailcloth, and the gang is taken aback by the discovery of the fourth key. Velma states that this cannot be a coincidence. The group takes the fourth key and continues with the dandy highwayman mystery, solving it and bringing back the majority of women he had seduced. Scooby falls asleep again at the end of the episode and returns to the Red Room, where he meets Nova once more. Nova speaks to him and tells him that she is not a normal dog but an Anunnaki occupying Nova's body. She states that she has been sent here to warn Scooby-Doo of a great danger. Nova explains that her people, the Anunnaki, visit the Earth every few thousand years during a time called Nibiru. The Anunnaki can inhabit various animals, and animals in present day that can talk are descendants of her people. The Anunnaki have a long history with humans and have helped them for centuries, but not all of them are good. There was once an evil Anunnaki, the evilest of them all, who was imprisoned in a crystal sarcophagus, the same sarcophagus the conquistadors had unfortunately found in Yucatan. Nova then tells Scooby that the time of Nibiru is coming, and that the planet Nibiru will align with Earth soon, allowing the entity to reach its full power and allowing it to be freed from its imprisonment. She warns Scooby-Doo that they must destroy it before the time of Nibiru comes in order to save the world. Scooby-Doo then wakes up from his dream and immediately informs his friend about the entity inside the sarcophagus, demanding that they must destroy it. In episode 21, The Man in the Mirror, the gang is called by Mayor Nettles to check out a house that is supposedly haunted, but things go awry when the gang enters the house to investigate. Fred goes down to the basement to look for any signs of paranormal activity. He walks past the mirror but catches his reflection moving. He steps closer to inspect his reflection and puts his face up to the mirror, but his own reflection grabs him and pulls him into the mirror. His reflection then walks out of the mirror pretending to be him, while the real Fred is transported into a twisted version of Crystal Cove where the town has been deserted and the only person remaining is Daphne, who is now old and fragile. A panicked Fred asks Daphne what happened, and old Daphne explains a vortex sped up time while Fred was gone due to the planispheric disc malfunctioning. She explains that in order to undo everything, Fred needs to tell her where the disc is, and only he knows where he hid it. Fred does not reveal the location of where he hid the disc to old Daphne because he quickly realizes that old Daphne is a fake and that the town he is in is an elaborate stage of a movie theater. We then cut back to the mystery gang who are with the phony Fred, and they too quickly realize that the Fred who came out of the basement is not the real Fred. The gang and Fred manage to trick their fake counterparts and leads them to an abandoned warehouse where they expose their fakes. The fakes turn out to be Brad and Judy, who altered their faces with plastic surgery in order to fool the kids and get them to reveal where they were hiding the disc. Even though Brad and Judy's ploy didn't work, they had a backup plan. Professor Pericles comes to the warehouse accompanied by his robots, which seize Daphne. In exchange for Daphne, he forces the gang to give up the disc. They are forced to give up the disc in order to get Daphne back. Pericles leaves with the disc and brings it back to Destroido to a secret chamber for safekeeping. He locks up the disc before saying, "I'm coming for you, Master. I'm coming to set you free." In episode 22, Nightmare in Red, Scooby begins to dream of the dancing man and Nova more frequently. His dreams have also become nightmares where the freak of Crystal Cove, who has become scarier, begins to appear as well. Scooby tells the gang about his nightmare the next morning, mentioning both the freak and the dancing man. This causes Velma to show him the book about supernatural curses, which has a photo of Professor Horatio Khan on the book, whom Scooby recognizes in his dreams as the dancing man. The group decides to visit Professor Horatio Khan to find out why he's been appearing in Scooby's nightmares. Velma, while open to the idea of the supernatural, believes it is ridiculous and that there must be some rational explanation for what is happening. The gang arrives at Professor Khan's mansion and tells him about Scooby's nightmares concerning him and the freak of Crystal Cove. Professor Khan further confesses that he too has been dreaming about the freak. The group asks the professor how they can get rid of Scooby-Doo's nightmares, and the professor responds by telling them about the sitting room, a place he defines as a waiting room between time, space, and multiple dimensions. He assures them that they will discover the answers they seek in the waiting room, but that they must be hypnotized to get there. He also informs Scooby that if the freak gets him in his dreams, he will never wake up again, and in order to stop the freak, they must discover the freak's true identity. The professor then instructs the students to form a circle on the floor and begins the hypnosis process. The gang falls under the hypnosis and finds themselves in the sitting room, which is the same room with the red curtains that Scooby-Doo had been visiting in his dreams. The gang wanders around, discovering several Crystal Cove residents frozen in time in the waiting room. Fred notices Mayor Jones in the crowd and assumes that he is the one behind the attacks because he was previously the freak of Crystal Cove. When he touches the mayor, he comes out of his trance. Fred confronts his old father, but Mayor Jones denies being the freak this time. He also reveals that the people in the waiting room are only a fraction of who they once were before the cursed treasure tainted them. He goes on to add that he got the idea for the freak of Crystal Cove from a dream he had about a monster, and that he knows the freak's true identity. But before he can reveal it to the gang, the freak arrives and chases the teenagers away, causing them to scatter in different directions. Fred runs down the corridor and is teleported to the Wild West, where he meets a group of 4 cowgirls and their pet bull. He looks closer and notices that one of the girls is wearing the key Fred and his friends found. It's the Conquistador's helmet, and Fred steps closer to get a better look, but suddenly the freak reappears again and begins chasing him. Fred runs away from the freak through the red curtain. After failing to capture Fred, the freak turns his attention to Shaggy and Scooby, who go in a different direction and end up in a post-Spanish Crystal Cove, where a mystery-solving group of banditos and their skunk are using the third key as a motar bowl. Scooby and Shaggy approach the group, but they barely have time to conduct a proper inspection before the freak appears and scares them away. We then cut to Velma, who finds the Mystery Fellowship or the Darrow family using the flintlock gun, aka the first key. Then Daphne is shown at the Burlington Library, where the Benevolent Lodge of Mystery have the 4th key, the Southcloth. After being pursued by the freak, the gang eventually reunites and meets in a tropical place overlooking a temple. Nova the dog then appears in front of them, inhabited once again by an Anunnaki. Anunnaki Nova explains that everything the gang has experienced, the things that have happened in the town, and the treasure itself were all brought about by a gang of mystery solvers before them. They were the first group of mystery solvers that confronted the entity confined in the sarcophagus. Nova tells the tale of the entity's discovery by the Hunters of Secrets, a group of Mayans and their pet jaguar. It promised them immense power, but the group realized the creature was evil and was merely manipulating to have them set it free. The Hunters of Secrets refused to release it, instead setting out to destroy it with a spear crafted of a unique stone known as the Heart of the Jaguar. But before they could, the sarcophagus was taken by a band of conquistadors led by Fernando Aguirre. The Hunters of Secrets' failure to destroy the sarcophagus would be the catalyst of the curse and begin a pattern of mystery-solving groups who would investigate the treasure but fail or die trying. And now it was the current Mystery Incorporated. Nova then says that it is Mystery Incorporated's responsibility to eliminate the evil entity and that they can only do it with the Heart of the Jaguar. She orders Scooby-Doo to locate it and end the curse once and for all. The gang is then pulled out of the dream realm and taken back to reality. Once they are back in the normal realm, the gang is horrified to learn that the entity is to blame for the town's strangeness. However, their disbelief fades as they remember the mission they need to complete, the mission to find the Heart of the Jaguar and destroy the entity. In In episode 23, the gang immediately begin their search for the heart of the Jaguar. They fly to Yucatan, the last known place of the weapon and where the Hunters of Secrets resided. In Yucatan, they find a temple known by the locals for being haunted. They travel through the jungle and find the temple. Once inside, they realize the temple is heavily booby-trapped, but thanks to Fred's skills, they are able to navigate their way through the temple without being harmed. After searching every corner of the temple, the gang discover the heart of the Jaguar in a tomb and they take it. With the heart of the Jaguar in their possession, they return to Crystal Cove. In episode 24, The Gates of Gloom, the gang returns to Crystal Cove following their search in Yucatan for the heart of the Jaguar, but something is terribly wrong. The town is desolate and there are hundreds of holes in the ground. The teenagers run to their homes only to discover that their family, much like everyone else in the town, has vanished. The group congregates at Fred's house concerned about the townsfolk's disappearances. The group also discusses the planispheric disk, Nibiru, the cursed treasure, and the upcoming planetary alignment that will allow the creature to be freed. Velma announces that the planets will align, causing Nibiru to emerge, and that they will have a limited amount of time to eliminate the creature. She also warns that once they reach the gates leading to the treasure, they should be prepared for anything. As they plan their next move, the ground begins to shake and abruptly opens, nearly sucking the gang underground. A mole-like truck emerges from the ground and Christopher bots emerge from the trucks and begin shooting up Fred's house. Fortunately, Fred's entire house is booby-trapped, which he uses to his advantage to destroy the robots. The gang then descends down the hole in Fred's house to the caves beneath Crystal Cove. They learn that everyone in the town is under Pericles' command, alongside the Old Mystery Incorporated. Pericles had abducted the townsfolk in order to use them to find a door or an entryway that led to the treasure. The gang retreats from the caves and realizes that they have to devise a strategy to rescue the townspeople. Shaggy and Scooby go undercover as Creepstopher bots, while Fred and the girls transform the mystery machine into a heavily armored weapon. The gang then sets their plan into motion by invading the caves and using the mystery machine to eliminate the robots while saving the citizens who return to the surface. However, more waves of surviving Creepstopher bots surround the mystery machine, causing Fred to blow it up in order to get rid of the remaining robots, and the mystery machine is finally gone for good. Meanwhile, Pericles had discovered what he was looking for, the gateway to the treasure and the entity. He opens the door using the planispheric disc, but realizes he needs the other keys to proceed, deducing that there are other gates behind this one. Pericles, Brad, Judy, and Mr. E walk through the door, carrying a trunk and hoping that the new Mystery Incorporated will follow them. Sure enough, the group who had been watching Pericles from afar follow him and enter the gates with the keys and the heart of the Jaguar in their possession, intending to eliminate the entity. Following episode 24, episode 25 has both Mystery Incorporated groups enter the gates. The old Mystery Incorporated walks through the tunnels just ahead of the new Mystery Inc. The gang pursues them through the tunnels and watches as their predecessors reach the first gate. The gang watches as the old Mystery Incorporated try to figure out how to get the first gate open. Velma surmises that the gates are representations of the four elements, air, earth, water, and fire, based on the alchemaic symbols that surround the gate's margins, and the keys they possess fit the specific element for each gate. With the first door consisting of air symbols, Velma figures out that the air gate requires the sailcloth to be opened, but in order to do so they must get past Pericles. Pericles is aware of this and grows impatient with their cat and mouse game. He calls out to the gang and demands that they reveal themselves. The gang remains hidden and question whether they should respond. Pericles, however, does not give them time to think as he forces their hand. He orders the robots to open the trunk they've been carrying around. From the trunk comes out Hot Dog Water, who Pericles had been keeping as a hostage. The gang hesitate to give Pericles the first key, but do so in order to save Hot Dog Water. The gang emerges from their hiding space and confront Pericles. As they approach him, Fred advises his friends to hang on to something as he suspects there is a trap on the first gate. The gang follows Fred's instructions and grabs the rocks around them. When Pericles notices the gang's odd behavior and realizes they are up to something, he instructs his robots and the rest of his crew to do the same, but Fred unlocks the gates before Pericles can do anything. The gates then begin to violently suck the air around them into a passageway along with everything else. Some of the Christopher bots are drawn into the passage and crushed, while the rest of the gang clings onto the rocks for dear life. Pericles and his team also avoid being swept into the vortex by clinging onto their surroundings. Pericles then instructs one of his remaining robots to grab Daphne and throw her into the vortex in an attempt to convince Fred to disable the trap. To keep Daphne from being sucked into the vortex, Fred is forced to disarm the trap by covering the passageway with the sailcloth. The sailcloth blocks the vortex's airflow, causing the gates to open. On the other side of the gate is a portal that leads to a strange dimension with a long wooden bridge and floating islands. Both the old and new Mystery Incorporated are in awe of the dimension in front of them. Amid their momentary confusion, Pericles is seized by Hot Dog Water and held as hostage to give her friends a head start. Velma is reluctant to leave her friend, but Hot Dog Water tells them to disregard her and to focus on the entity. The group enters the alternate dimension, listening to Hot Dog Water but ultimately leaving her behind. They begin to cross the interdimensional bridge and note that there is truly no turning back now. Back at the first gate, Hot Dog Water is determined to keep Pericles hostage as long as possible in order to buy time for her friends, but she is blindsided by Judy Reeves, who sneaks up behind her and trips her, causing her to collapse and releasing Pericles. With that Pericles' leverage, Hot Dog Water is defenseless against the Christopher bots who raise their guns at her. The robots' guns can be heard firing in the distance as the gang is almost reaching the end of the bridge. Scooby turns to look at Velma sadly and she reciprocates the look but instructs him to keep moving. Using all the keys they've collected, the gang unlocks all 4 gates until they finally reach the last gate. Mystery Incorporated gathers their courage and says a few last words before they go through the last gate. They proceed to enter the gate, which leads them to a lava-filled cave. It is then they realize that the 4th gate has returned them to Crystal Cove, beneath the town where the entity has been all along. The group approaches the sarcophagus carrying the heart of the jaguar. Scooby wonders what to do with the weapon, but then suddenly the entity speaks and commands them to set it free. Naturally, the group refuses and claims they have come to destroy it. The entity then taunts the group, saying that they were meant to set it free. It informs them they are nothing more than a string of puppets similar to the mystery-solving groups that came before them, and that their entire life has just been leading up to this moment. Even the connections they have with each other were created by the creature as a means of exploitation. The planets eventually align as the entity speaks, marking the beginning of Nibiru. The group wonders whether the creature is telling the truth as they stand there, confused and unsure. Shaggy even questions whether they would have even become friends if it weren't for the entity. Daphne, however, rejects the idea and asserts that both her love for Fred and her friendship with the gang are real. The gang realizes that Daphne is right and the creature is attempting to manipulate them once again. They disregard the entity's words and Scooby-Doo raises the spear, ready to deliver the killing blow with the heart of the jaguar. But as he brings the spear down, it is snatched from his hands by Professor Pericles, who has finally caught up with the gang with his remaining Christopher bots and his 2 lackeys, Brad and Judy, alongside with his hostage Mr. E. Pericles throws the spear to the side and then opens the sarcophagus, releasing the evil entity. The entity is freed and it towers over all who are standing in the cavern. It immediately grabs Scooby-Doo and declares that it shall devour his soul and use his body as a vassal to inhabit so it can spread its darkness across the world. Scooby-Doo resists, refusing to allow himself to be devoured. Pericles offers himself up instead, submitting to the creature, believing that he will gain the ultimate power by fusing with the entity, which is what he wanted all along. The entity takes Pericles as its vassal and pours its essence into the parrot. Pericles and the creature fuse, morphing the parrot's body into a massive squid-like monster with horns. However, Pericles does not attain ultimate power as the entity completely overtakes him and steals his body. Then the creature consumes Brad and Judy in order to increase its strength. The entity then takes control of Pericles' Christopher bots and commands them to capture the gang and Mr. E in order to grow its power and free itself from its sarcophagus that it's tethered to. The Mystery Gang and Mr. E run, obviously not wanting their souls to be devoured. However, Scooby-Doo stays behind because he is determined to stop the entity. He moves towards the creature, armed with the heart of the jaguar that Pericles had thrown aside. He runs towards the creature, jumping in the air and ramming it with the spear, but upon contact with the entity, the spearhead shatters, leaving him with no weapon to destroy the creature. Before the entity can consume him, Scooby-Doo quickly escapes and joins his friends who are dodging the Christopher bots. They are able to eliminate 5, but a Christopher bot they overlooked ambushes the group and forces them to return to the entity. Mr. E decapitates the robot to stop the gang from being devoured. Mr. E orders the gang to find a way out, giving them time to flee the cave, but he is unable to get out. He is seized by the creature. The gang looks on as Mr. E informs them that it's too late to save him before he is eaten. The entity turns its attention once more to the gang after consuming Mr. E. It extends its tendrils in an attempt to touch them, but it is thwarted by some type of blue energy shield that appears to surround the gang. The teenagers wonder what just happened, but they are unable to think about it for very long since the creature shifts its focus to Crystal Cove. Lava erupts beneath the town and seeps up to the surface as the monster uses its power. The people in Crystal Cove start to panic as lava engulfs the town. From its sarcophagus, the entity then summons a horde of monstrous-looking creatures, ordering them to fetch it more souls to feed on. The gang flees and reaches the town's surface as the entities and minions emerge from the sarcophagus and attack the town. They begin to grab the townspeople, offering them up to the entity. The gang avoids the servants of the entities as they watch their friends and their families get devoured. They begin to lose hope after not only seeing their families die, but also realizing that the only weapon they had against the entity was destroyed. Their despair worsens as they are cornered by the entity's monsters. The monsters charge, ready to capture them. Scooby Doo cries out in desperation maneuver and suddenly time freezes. Everyone is frozen with the exception of Scooby Doo, who sees a vision from Nova's Anunnaki. She tells him that the heart of the jaguar was never the spear but rather something else, and that Scooby Doo will know what to do when the time is right. Time is then unfrozen and the entity's minions capture the group and returns them to the entity. They witness the entity devouring the last of Crystal Cove's citizens before it turns on them. The entity reaches out to grab Mr. Incorporated, but it is stopped by the same blue barrier that shielded the gang earlier. At that moment, Scooby Doo recalls Nova's words and realizes the true meaning behind them. The true heart of the jaguar was the power of friendship and love, embodied by the bonds he and his friends share. It's the reason why the entity could not touch them. Scooby and his friends are able to avoid the entity once more, and Scooby Doo retrieves the heart of the jaguar, which has now been reduced to a stick. The gang realize that the creature cannot harm them because the love they hold for each other. Velma also concludes that the crystal sarcophagus is the entity's weak point, and that if destroyed, they may have a chance in defeating it. With that, the gang grabs the remains of the heart of the jaguar and charges towards the sarcophagus. The entity sends its minions to stop them, but the gang perseveres, and despite being overwhelmed, they manage to push past the minions. Scooby Doo then grabs the heart of the jaguar and kicks it, launching it into the crystal sarcophagus and shattering it. Upon shattering the sarcophagus, the entity howls and loses all its powers. A vortex suddenly emerges from the shattered sarcophagus, sucking everything into it. It sucks up the town, the entity's monsters, and the entity itself, except for the gang. After everything is sucked up by the vortex, a massive galactic explosion occurs, followed by a blinding bright light. When the light fades, Mr. Incorporated appears to be in Crystal Cove again. The town has returned to normal, looking undamaged and seemingly fine. The gang celebrates, realizing they've defeated the entity. They stand in the streets of Crystal Cove looking around when Sheriff Bronson Stone and Mayor Nettles, who are surrounded by 4 children, approach them. They remind Daphne that she promised to babysit their children before they leave for the beach. The gang is confused by the sight of Mayor Nettles and Sheriff Stone, whom they can't recall ever being married, nor does Daphne recall promising anything to the couple. The gang begins to look around the town and upon closer inspection, notices drastic changes around Crystal Cove. The first is the town sign that reads "The sunniest place on earth" instead of "The spookiest place on earth." The second is another sign that reveals that Danny Darrow is alive and well and the current dean of Darrow University instead of Dean Fank, and that the Darrow mansion is above ground and has been declared a historical landmark. Confused by what they are seeing, the gang split up to investigate further. When Fred and Daphne arrive at Fred's house, they discover Fred's real parents and Daphne's parents together. Fred's parents are cheerful and polite, as if they had never abandoned Fred as a newborn. Daphne also learns from her parents that she and Fred are engaged and that their parents are assisting them in planning their wedding. At the Rogers home, Shaggy and Scooby discover from Shaggy's parents that Shaggy is the president of the Chef's Club and the winner of multiple cooking awards, and is regarded as a golden boy to his parents and not a slacker. Whilst looking at TV, Scooby and Shaggy discover that Destroyer has been replaced with Creation X, an environmentally friendly company owned by Ricky Owens and his co-owner Cassidy Williams, who is not only alive and well but also his wife. Alongside them is Professor Pericles, their company mascot, who is unscarred and seemingly friendly. When Velma arrives at her house, she discovers that her and Hot Dog Water are romantically involved and are on a team that wins the Tri-State Olympiad of Science every year. Velma is perplexed by all the changes in the town, but when she yells Schrodinger's cat, she realizes why everything is turned upside down. Velma finally realizes what is going on and sets out to find her friends. Fred and Daphne continue their journey through their unfamiliar town, arriving at the Crystal Cove High School. Fred is greeted on the soccer field by Gary and Ethan, who congratulate him for winning a soccer championship the night before, which Fred does not recall winning. They also thank him for letting them borrow his van, but when Fred looks at the van, he sees nothing that resembles his beloved Mystery Machine. Fred Jones Sr. then approaches Fred Jones while dressed as a soccer coach. Fred calls him Mayor Dad out of habit, which confuses Fred Jones Sr., but he admits that he likes the sound of it and says that even though he never had children, he regarded Fred to be a sort of son to him. Before leaving, Fred Jones Sr. hands Fred a CD with Mr. E's symbol from the Miskatonic University, explaining that a friend at the university wanted him to have it. The gang regroups again and Velma explains why the town is so strange. She explains that after the entity was destroyed, a new timeline was created. A timeline where its influence never got a hold of anybody, thus meaning the curse never happened, the townspeople never dressed up as monsters, and the mystery groups before them never disappeared. Now, the group lives in a normal timeline, a timeline without any mysteries. The gang is horrified by the idea of a world with no mysteries and is left with a rather depressing reality. With nothing else to do, Fred decides to watch the CD given to him by Fred Jones Sr. The video starts up and on the screen appears Harlan Elliotson, who reveals himself to be the Mr. E in this timeline. Mr. Elliotson tells the kids that he knows who they are and he knows they created an alternate timeline. He says that he too passed through their new timeline and recalls everything about their previous one, since he spent his years studying different timelines. He informs them that he is now Professor of Subnuclear Sciences at the Miskatonic University and that he has enrolled the gang in his classes for the following semester, where he will explain everything. He assures them there is still much meddling and mysteries in the world and that he expects to see them soon. The gang becomes excited and decides to begin their journey to the Miskatonic University right away, but before they leave they restore the Mystery Machine to its former glory. As the Mystery Machine drives away from Crystal Cove, Nova, who is still under the control of the Anunnaki, praises Scooby Doo, declaring him to be the bravest dog who ever lived. Scooby Doo looks back at the town and towards Nova one final time and then faces forward, and then yells out Scooby Dooby Doo. And there you have it, that is the entire timeline of the Curse of Crystal Cove, beginning with the entity's first interaction with the first mystery solving group in Yucatan, and ending with its final confrontation with the last mystery solving group. The Curse's history is convoluted, lengthy, yet ever so fascinating. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you and goodbye.